Hello and welcome to Cheapskate. I'm Cameron and this is Making the Neck Blank. I hope the volume wasn't too loud, or I hope I remember to turn down the sound of that circular saw there. So what we've got is a piece of pine radiata and it is flat sawn. So I've cut it in half and then we rotate it like so and it becomes quarter sawn timber. And we'll also, of course, will become laminated when we glue that together. So couple of reasons why I'm doing it this way. One, because it's pine, it's pretty light wood. It's only about 550 kilograms per cubic meter dry weight, so it's not a particularly heavy wood, it's a soft wood. You can see here the grain is running up and down now, so that makes it now quarter sawn. That makes it stronger in the up and down direction, which is the direction the strings pull it in, and so that's why quarter sawn is generally considered better for a neck. It's stronger anyway, a little bit stronger. And because this is soft wood, I wanted it to be as strong as possible. And the reason for laminating it, just cutting it in half and gluing it back together again, which kind of seems pointless, I guess, but it's because it helps to take the tension out of the wood. So if the wood is feeling like it wants to twist one way or the other, this is my understanding anyway, when we sculpt it and start to remove material off the neck to get the right thickness for the neck, then the tension can be released from the wood and it'll bend and go off on funny angles. So if we cut it in half first to release some of that tension, you can see by the bowing in it that it has released some of its tension. Then we sand it flat and glue it back together again. When we're doing the neck carve, it's less likely to distort or move. So that's the reason for the laminating without trying to make it look fancy. So now I have my sanding board, which I made, which just has some sandpaper using the luthier's trick to glue it down with some masking tape. And I'm going back and forth. You can see it's actually quite raised in the middle where my fingers are. You can actually see the gap underneath this, so it's quite bowed. And I spend hours sanding. I'm not going to show you the hours of sanding, but there was a lot of sanding. I wasn't using any down pressure, because if I use down pressure, especially with such soft wood, the wood would just bend it in the middle, or it would push down and become flat, and the sanding would sand everything. I just wanted to sand the bits that were high, so I had to do it without pressure, so it takes a long time. So here we can see, you can see the end grain there, how it's now quarter sawn. The joints aren't great, they're okay. But you can see also when I glued it together, it wasn't level. I'm not really good at having worked out a good technique for that. Now, after a lot of sanding, I've got one side quite flat now.
Sanded.
As you can see there, almost has a shine on it. You can still see the hairline where the joint is, and this is one reason for putting some dark wood between the two pieces. One, it looks cool, and two, it hides the joint. Makes it look like a feature instead of being messed up. This side is quite rough, as my dog would say. My dog would say it's quite rough. Sorry about that joke. Okay, so once again I'm sanding. My hands are not on top of the wood. My fingers are just gripping the sides, and I'm going back and forward. So I'm being careful not to put any pressure, downward pressure on it. So, yeah. Now you'll notice that with this technique, it's taken me a while. I'm actually halfway through my second build now, which is also a through neck and is laminated as well. And the way it works, I go off the edge, as you can see me here going right off the edge, because with sanding it seems to take more off the edges than it does out of the middle. I think because the fibers are non-supported. So I always go off the edge, so it spends less time sanding the edges. And it seems to even it out a fair bit. So it was still really rough, and it wasn't working with the sanding, and because it was so much difference between the two halves, and it was actually starting to tilt the wood, so I was starting to shave a little bit off on an angle on the flatter side. So I decided I had to remove this rough material. So I didn't really have any equipment to do it with, so I decided to just get my chisel out and just sort of put it on the flatter side and push it across to try and get it the other side the same level, roundabout. I started off with really bad technique. You can see here I'm just sort of pushing straight into it and trying to just push the chisel through it. As you get further on, I started to develop a technique where I was sort of pushing into it a little bit and then just curving the blade or sliding the blade away, and that was more like slicing it, which seemed to be, I was starting to do it there. You can see I'm starting to take a circular motion. and that seemed to work better. Wasn't ideal though. What ended up happening was that I did get it level, so it got it the same level as the other side, but I also took sometimes some chunks out, and so I ended up with divots in that side, which meant I had to sand the whole thing down to the level of the divots if I wanted to get it flat. So it's actually not the greatest of techniques. So if you have a technique, by the way, for quickly doing that, please let me know. I guess planing would be the better way to go. At this point in the video, I didn't own a plane, and as you can see, I actually am not great with chisels either. I only really hardly ever use chisels even, so yeah. Later on, I do have a plane now, and I guess would just plane it would probably be the easiest way to get that side down level with the other side. But if you don't have a plane, I guess this is a way of doing it. It's quite labour intensive because of the amount of damage that I do in doing it. But you see here my technique's getting a little bit better, and I'm not having to use as much force. It is sort of more like, I'm not trying to take off big chunks in one go like I was doing when I started. I'm starting to like just try and take off like a smaller area at a time, and it comes out a bit better because of that. So as you all know, if you're watching this series, I am not someone who possesses much in the way of woodworking skills. I'm really pretty much a beginner. Just did a couple of things, making boxes and things. Made some boxes and toilet roll holders to try and improve my woodworking skills a little bit before I started the guitar. But that's one of the reasons why this is a test guitar, is because I'm treating it as a learning curve. I'm not using expensive woods. In fact, I've deliberately used pine, and I have no intention of keeping this guitar once it's finished. It is a prototype. For the next guitar I do will be the actual build, and that way it takes a lot of pressure off me, and I'm willing to take risks. I'm willing to question some, I guess, ingrained wisdom, like, you must do it this way, you must do this, this will work, this won't work. I'm able to question those sort of things and say, well, what happens if I do that, and actually do it and see what happens, because ultimately I'm going to throw it away anyway. So hey, why not take a chance and see what happens? So I've been doing a bit of that, and I will be doing a bit of that in this build, which actually is really beneficial. So I'm just showing there that I'm low on the on my left, or your top end of screen there. It's the same with both of them. They're both low in that area. So what I'm going to do now is use my homemade sanding board here to sand one side more than the other. But before I do that, I'm just going to check and make sure it is actually flat across from side to side as well. With sanding on something like this, as I said, it does take more off the edges, and so I tend to find eventually end up with a bit of a hump in the middle because the edges just tend to sand away faster. I'm not sure if there's a technique for not making that happen. If there is, please let me know. So more sanding. I'm actually not showing you much of the sanding. It's hours of sanding. And now that I'm doing my second build, I'm using hardwoods, and it takes even longer. So we're now just marking with pencil, just so we can see the high spots. You can see it still looks quite rough where I've had a go at it with the chisel. So it's evened out the thickness on each side, but it's roughed it up a lot. So in this case, I'm not putting any downward pressure. I'm just going side to side, and we're just going to see where it sands, where the sandpaper's touching, to see what the high spots are. And we can see it sanding off that edge and that end heavily. Not so much in the middle. So there's a few methods I use to do that. So here I'm showing my normal method. Now I'm putting my fingers on top because I want to put pressure in on that side, and so I'm putting a little bit of downward pressure just to increase the amount of sanding in that area. The other technique I do use, I'm not sure if it's in this video, but I actually put half of it on the paper and half off the paper, and that also gives me more sanding, just, well, only sanding on one side and not the other side. So as we progress through these videos, you'll see me getting better and better at certain things. So now I'm using micrometer just to measure the thickness along both sides to see if we're getting even thicknesses. I kind of I find it difficult at the moment still to get timber square, like on the sides, and I struggle using the sides as a square. So I've been getting one side perfectly flat, then trying to make the other side flat as well, and then checking thicknesses all the way along until I get the thicknesses even all the way along on both sides with two perfectly flat sides, and that makes it square, if you know what I mean. The actual sides compared to the top don't really matter. Now in this instance I'm holding one end of the board, letting the other end go right off, and just keeping one end mostly on. So I'm trying to sand one side of this more than the other. So various techniques to sand one area more heavily than the other. And constantly checking with a straight edge. A straight edge is probably, well, it's the one piece of equipment I can't do this build without. I don't own anything else that is flat and straight. So without this I'm gone. Now you can see it's pivoting there, whereas on the other side of the guitar it was actually scraping. So when it pivots I know I've got a high point. When it scrapes all along the length I know I'm flat. Now what I'm doing is, because it's getting pretty close now, I'm measuring along both sides. I'm actually writing the numbers down on the timber so I know where I'm at. Now I can't remember if I did it at this stage or whether I learnt my lesson or whatever, but write the numbers on the side you're not sanding. Otherwise you sand your numbers off straight away. But anyway. Yeah. And once we get to this sort of stage, it's almost worth you just sort of using a sanding block and sanding the areas that are a bit high. And then once you get that, just going over the whole thing again lightly with the sanding beam to get rid of any bumps. So for the way I'm doing it here, micrometer is pretty important as well. But I know this is called cheapskate. I mean, these are cheap micrometers, but the straight edge is something I would say that even if you are a cheapskate like me, straight edge is something worth paying a bit of money for. Getting something that's precision ground, and if you can get it that's got a ruler measurements on it as well, that's even better. You want one that's at least 60 centimeters, or what's that, 2 feet, I think 60 centimeters is about. Because the 30 centimeters is just too short for building a guitar, especially if you're like me doing it through neck. In fact, I probably could have even gone the longer one. 90 centimeters would have been good. So we've got 31.9 over 31.3, so that's a bit of a difference. 31.5 down there. Now when I've drawn a line, it just means that that measurement continues until the end of that line. 31.0 over 31.3, so that's half a mil difference between one side and the other. And then we start getting down now, so we've got 31.3, and at the end here it's 31 over 30.6, so the ends tend to sand faster, as I said, than the middle, and so that end is looking a bit light. So now I'm using a sanding block, and as you can see I'm just doing one side of the two pieces of timber. I think they may be, because I flipped them over, they might be sanding at a slightly different rate to each other. But we are getting close now. But getting these flat, especially the fretboard side flat, is critical to the build. So it's just something you have to spend, in my view, a lot of time on. The neck is, in my opinion, without doubt, the most important part of the guitar. And making the neck blank for me is the hardest, most time consuming and most important part of the entire build. The rest of it, like putting the body on, sorry, here we go, 31.3 over 31.3. 31.4 over 31.5, so pretty consistent all the way along there, only 0.1 of a millimetre difference. 31.2, 31.3. We drop away a little bit there, 30.9 to 30.9, but it's not too bad, and then 30.7 to 30.6. So it's looking pretty good. And you see there, I just want to, I don't want to touch that end, that low end at all, and I'm going to sand the rest of it down a little bit more, try and get it a bit closer to that thinner end. And then we should be pretty good. Now, this is a point where I'm going to start using some actual force. And so now I'm pushing down fairly hard and sanding, because I know the board now is pretty flat. So I know by pushing, I'm not pushing any bumps out of it. Like, I'm not hand flattening it with pressure, in other words. And so, because it's already flat, I can put pressure on it, just try and remove some timber off that end, and not off the other end, if you know what I mean. And we've got to this stage now where it's completely flat lengthways, and so now I have realised there's a bump in the middle. So I'm using this. I also use this flat board here with some sandpaper glued on for my fret leveling as well in this build. But here I'm using it just to take the hump out of the centre of the board and get it more in line with the rest. I kind of do this until I can just see the actual middle is looking a tiny bit lower than the rest, not until it's dead level, so I get it a tiny bit lower, and then I turn it around and sand the whole thing on the actual beam and get it all flat again, and not for very long in that part, and then that's it, it's done. But here I'm going slowly because I need to make sure I'm accurate, so I don't like turn it and hit the sides by accident. I need to try and keep it straight down the middle. And I'm rocking my body back and forward, so I'm keeping consistent pressure. I like, by the way, to move my body. You probably noticed when I was doing the other sanding as well. By using my legs and moving my body a lot, it stops me from getting a stiff back. So, just a little tip there for you. And we'll grab the camera, have a look. And so we use the pencil so we can make sure that we're sanding the section we want to sand. And there we go. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to Cheapskate. And see you soon.